pero que luego consigue situarse en el mercado de manera absolutamente competitiva. Es decir, la gente no lleva EcoAlf porque quiero ser muy respetuoso con el medio ambiente, o no solo por eso, sino también porque me identifico con la marca, porque me gusta el diseño, porque es un precio competitivo. Y creo que eso es fundamental, porque si solo dependemos de que la gente tenga unas determinadas pautas de consumo por responsabilidad, por hacer el bien, pues eso tiene una escala mucho más limitada que si conseguimos que no solo quieren hacer el bien, sino que eso sea realmente competitivo, ¿no? Por lo tanto, felicidades por el proyecto y que es un proyecto apasionante. I'm going to switch to English here because our next panel is in English. It's a panel that will tell us how we go from ESG to impact. So I guess the first thing we need to have is a very clear definition of what's ESG and what's impact, which is not always 100% clear. The panel will be moderated by Cristina Marsal, who is the founder and CEO of Sandman Capital Advisors, a good friend and a good friend of Ship2B from many years. And then I want to especially thank you, the three panelists, because the three of them come from abroad. We have Bertrand Badrey, who is the founder of Blue Like an Orange Capital. We have Keim Koenig, sorry for the pronunciation if it's not totally correct, who is the executive director of LGT Capital Partners. And we have Cliff Pryor, who is the CEO of the Global Steering Group for Impact Investment. Thank you all.
This. It's really a pleasure to see every year how this event is evolving. But I'm not going to make many introductions because this panel is so extraordinary that I would like to go forward and introduce the speakers today. First of all, we will have Bertrand Badrey, who is founder of Blue Like an Orange Capital. He's raising his second fund in Latin American private debt investments, but mainly he's very well known also for the book that he published recently this year with Sciences Po, and The Economist has spoken about it, regarding, and this book is kind of asking itself, do you have the book here, Bertrand? No, you cannot show it. It's like, we'll find the finance save the world, basically, that's the message. And this is the question, so maybe we answer this by speaking afterwards. But I would like to say that Bertrand is HEC alumni, is Sorbonne in history. He did Sciences Po, and it's an ENA. He was Group CFO of Crédit Agricole and also of SocGen, has been working at the World Bank, and has been also a member of the World Economic Forum, etc. So we're really honored to have you here, Bertrand, and I know you flew this morning from Paris, so thank you very much for this. We look forward to hear you as an asset manager about what's going on in the world of ESG towards impact. We have also Cliff Pryor. Cliff is Oxford Biochemistry alumni. He's CEO of the Global Steering Group for Impact Investment, and he's currently in the G7 for the UK presidency, involved in all the negotiations. He was very active in COP26 last couple of weeks, and has been always involved in social firms or trusts or foundations, and is really very involved nowadays in how do we measure all these things we're talking about. It's very nice, and we are very impressed with the company we have just seen, but if we invest into companies, how are we going to be able to measure if they are in impact or in ESG, etc.? So Cliff will tell us a little bit about that. Keim Koenig, Dutch and living in Switzerland, is Executive Director at LGT Capital Partners. LGT Capital Partners is a firm founded by the Liechtenstein family, who is a total believer, and we think families, and here many of you are families, are one of those who have the values to push towards impact investment, and such is the principal family investing in LGT Capital. Keim studied INSEAD, but he has been involved in sustainability for many, many years because he was at Robeco Sam Sustainable Asset Management for 11 years, especially focusing also on clean mobility, for example. So we're going to talk about this evolution, from this ESG, which I hope all of you know what it is, environment, social, and governance. I would like to remember that, or remind it. It's this criteria of ESG that are kind of mainstream today, but we're not seeing yet in everywhere measured, but it is mainstream. We started in the 1960s with social responsible investments, and already in 2005, it was discussed about ESG thanks to United Nations initiative. Since then, we think these criteria are becoming mainstream, but these requirements that have been used for many years, it's kind of evolving towards impact. And these requirements to be an impact investment, which is not necessarily only ESG, is evolving. So I would like to start asking, first of all, Kempe, what is the evolution from ESG to impact in LGT Capital, or from the family's perspective as an asset owner? How has it evolved the firm, and what have you been doing to make sure that you're evolving towards impact?
Yes, sure. Happy to talk about it. Thank you, Christina, also for the nice introduction. And Ship to Be, thanks for having us. This is going to be hopefully an exciting discussion, also hopefully a bit provocative or some interesting statements. Let me start quietly with indeed addressing your question. Moving from ESG to impact, you probably have to take a step back as you think about being an asset owner or a large investor. You think about your entire portfolio, right? And one of our largest portfolios is actually a big endowment portfolio, which is about 18 billion. And if you want to move such a big ship, if you will, towards sustainability, you have to start probably at a not a low ambition level, but at a sort of realistic level. And that's how we went about, sort of how we went through our ESG journey and our sustainability journey. We've been working on that for 20 years now. And you probably start indeed with the classical ESG integration, right? Which is where a lot of the investors came from, thinking about ESG from a risk perspective, trying to take out certain risks that weren't necessarily originally captured by financial analysis. Luckily, we've moved a long way and come a long way from thinking as ESG factors as being non-financial or externalities. But moving from sort of basically what I'm trying to explain is we gradually moved the bar from ESG integration towards thinking more and more, okay, what are the specific goals that we want to achieve with that ESG integration? So basically moving from a risk ID towards adding towards financial management, and then later on you get to this level of specifically thinking about outcomes, and of course we're going to talk about that as well. But impact outcomes, you can only start thinking about if you have a holistic view on how to manage an entire portfolio, right? And this is also often the discussion that we're having with institutional investors, big pension funds, to literally move the ship. You have to really think about, okay, how does that work for different asset classes? How does that work for my specific sustainability agenda? And that's how we operate also as a principal investor and also managing the family money. Nowadays, we're actually also for large parts of our portfolios thinking about these outcomes, right? And one specific one is for instance, Paris aligning portfolios. It's not easy, by the way, but I would argue that's probably much easier than setting specific targets for social goals. But still, there's still a lot of work to do on Paris aligning portfolios. We're 6 years now, and we just had the COP, indeed, as you mentioned. There's still a lot of talk about pledges, but there's too little action. So there's actually taking it step by step and making it realistic is what we're trying to do.
I would like to say that just to put things a little bit into context, the LGT Capital Partners Group invests more than 50 billion in private assets, and mainly they all already are looking at ESG, and they are investing now in impact for a while. And I would like to say that, for example, it was so inspiring to see the EcoAlf presentation that we are all, I think, running after this session and going to buy something there, even if it's Black Friday, even you put a higher price, because it's very inspiring. They invest in about 50, already directly, since recently, 50 companies that are in exactly that type of businesses. So it's good to see that even the very large investors are going this direction. Yeah, and sorry, maybe just to add, so what I was explaining, so if you think about a portfolio of 18 billion in this endowment or 100 billion if a pension fund, you cannot deploy 100 billion in only EcoAlf businesses, right? So you have to think holistically about, okay, how do I create a framework that is helping me along
many different asset classes, and that's indeed an important part, and we're going to get back to this investment opportunity set later on, but that's important thinking and consideration, yeah.
And this is such a responsibility to invest that large amount of money, but Bertrand, you have been involved in the public sector and now in the private, and as an investor today, as an asset manager, do you think is there enough flows of capital going in this direction? How do you see the investor world in, this important in building that this financial institution, you also always mention it's important to build financial institutions that work well for the world, and you mentioned this in your book. What is your view as an asset now manager? Are we doing well? Is this moving forward towards impact? Can you be provocative? Is it true or not?
Yes, I can be provocative. No, thank you very much. I like your question. How do we move from ESG to impact? I would like to say, how do we move from here to ESG first, and then from ESG to impact? We are in a room where most people are familiar with everything we are discussing. They are well ahead of the curve. We should turn back and look behind us. And there are many more millions of people behind us which are not there yet. And the big question we're facing today is, on the one hand, we have the feeling that something is happening. And again, with people like Cliff and Kemke, it's happening. That is true. On the other hand, I don't think we should fool ourselves. I think we are really at a moment where it's still very foggy. What do I mean with foggy? I mean, everybody talks about ESG. It's been a while, actually. You're right. There was supposedly an acceleration with the commitments we made in 2015 when we agreed on the Paris Agreement on climate, when we agreed on the Sustainable Development Goals. And I was managing director of the World Bank at that moment, and I was part of all the conversation. And to be honest, I fooled myself because I thought that now that we have agreed to the direction, to sustainable development, meaning a resilient, inclusive, and sustainable economic model, the invisible end will find its way. And we never really discussed whether the system was fit for purpose or not. We believed this would work naturally, that it would not be too painful, that it would be a succession of incremental changes. And now we realize, and EcoAlf was very good from that perspective, that it's not going to be slow and incremental. We need really to change the heart of the system. And that's why I'm always hesitant when we discuss ESG and impact. On the one hand, I think it's absolutely crucial we go in that direction, but I want this to become the norm, not a kind of emergency exit or a side thing where we develop ESG and impact on one end, and we leave the heart of the system moving on the other end. And that's precisely, I think, we are at the crossroads today. And so on the one hand, we have to work, and Cliff will discuss that as well, on how do we make ESG more solid, how do we basically build the stairs, because I think it's a long stairs where the first step is ESG, and then we move slowly, but I don't want this to be a diversion. I don't want us to lose sight of, we need to work the heart of the system. LGT alone, blue like an orange alone, will not suffice. We need really to work, to enter, as I often say, we need to open the hood, take our toolbox, and work on the metrics and the system. So it's not just impact standards. It will be really addressing the heart of the accounting system, the heart of our compensation policies, the heart of our fiduciary duties, etc., so that the system is changing. Because if we don't change the system, as been said at the COP26, what we discuss is urgent. We are not debating, 50 or 100 years from now. We're debating 10 years from now. And so what is very difficult in all our position is that on the one hand, we know you have to be realistic because you don't shift trillions like this. But realistic means the appropriate combination of ambition, and the ambition is we have to change the system, and humility because we know it's taking time and it's difficult. And that's where I think this is the wall we are facing today. So I don't think it's a lack of opportunity. I don't think it's a lack of money. There is plenty of money. Actually, we discovered trillions thanks to COVID. So there is whatever it costs. We know there is money everywhere. So money is not the issue. There is plenty of opportunity. But the issue is to adjust all of this to make it work naturally and embed this in the way we operate our economies. And so on the one hand, again, things are happening. On the other hand, it's a long, long walk, and we should not be complacent. And just to finish, I was amazed when, and again, I've been working with Mark Carney, with the UN Special Envoy for Finance and Climate. So I really admire what he's been doing. But I was amazed that when you had this announcement in Glasgow that $130 trillion would be committed to climate change, I haven't seen many journalists that really say, what does it mean $130 trillion are committed? It's not $130 trillion. The $130 trillion is the sum of assets under management by some asset manager, the size of balance sheet from banks, the size of insurance provisions, etc. It doesn't mean that you have found $130 trillion for climate. It means that the combined size of all these institutions that might potentially move in that direction is that. But people have jumped from, there is a big figure, let's get it and put it. And now people ask me, but we found the money, so there is no problem left. So we have to be very clear.
This 130 trillion Bertrand is referring to, it's all the alignment of all the signatories to the net zero agreements that have been reached, which are several organizations from around the world. And it's, as you say, indeed a huge number. And we cannot say we're there. It's the intention, right?
I'm sure all the legal or general counsel of each company has precisely looked at what does it mean when I sign this paper. And then they will start working on how can I navigate this. I mean, this is already happening. I've seen that from inside many times.
This is a very good point. You know, we are a multifamily office and have to invest money, and we're investors. So when we look at funds, some pretend to be sustainable. And how can we check if they are really sustainable? We definitely, for example, as a small company, don't have the time. But more and more, first of all, regulators, as Anna Rivalta said very well, regulators are pushing institutions to measure, to offer, and to make sure we include this in the offering. But we're not quite sure yet where to find this information. And this brings me to the next question for Clive, who has been really in Glasgow and very active with this in the global steering group for impact investment measurement. And so, Clive, you're working on harmonization standards. Are we going to have one way to figure out which companies are ESG compliant or definitely impact in certain considerations? Which tools are being developed, and what is your view on all of that? Because it's true that we still cannot, will be there just one standard or not, or every region, how are we evolving this, also geopolitically speaking?
Thanks, Christina. And I'm just going to agree with everyone. This is problematic for a panel. We need to disagree. So I'll try and come at least from a different angle. And the GSG is a market builder. It's not an investor, and it works through the development of national advisory boards for impact, country by country, including the Spain National Advisory Board as an example. And that's what we're trying to do, is make sure that at least 2/3 of the population has its own voice on the future of finance, on the future of impact and the way things are measured and organized. And that's why are we saying that? Well, because frankly, it's North America and Europe that have caused the problem for the rest of the world, and the rest of the world needs to have a voice. It needs to have its own voice and its own journey. So, coming on to the question of impact and impact measurement and management. So, we've been working on impact investing. Well, I've been working on it for about 15 years. Impact investing is just absolutely lovely. It's a joy to work on. It breaks new ground. It reaches deep societal issues. It's got not even $1 trillion of assets under management in impact management, impact investment over the course of perhaps 20 years. And we need 90 trillion. And we are not going to get from 1 to 90 easily. So, what do we do about that?
Why do we need 90 trillion?
We need 90 trillion in order to achieve net zero and the SDGs. And we don't have very long on that. So what are we doing? And that's why we're putting together this impact task force with the G7 presidency in the UK. And that's doing two things, really. One is mobilization of private capital for public good, and particular focus on emerging economies. And then the other work stream, which is on harmonization of standards, transparency of reporting, and integrity of the system, integrity of data, integrity of operations, integrity of governance. And that package, we believe, is a system change for finance. Now, is it achievable? At the start of this task force, which has 120 leading figures, the people that you would need to be in the room to make agreements, those three areas of harmonization, transparency, and integrity locked in the very first meeting. In the very last meeting, everybody starts challenging because they realize, what does that mean for their organization? It's gone from a principle to a practical, and there is still a lot of work to be done there. Let's take the area of harmonization of standards. If we have the current mess of standards, we are not going to achieve the integrity that we need. We are not going to achieve our net zero and SDG targets. Why aren't we? Because they're not interoperable. There are a lot of black box systems for standards. There are a lot of one-sided standards. And this is true even for intentional impact investing, that far too many investors think, this is what I intend to do, therefore I'll manage that, not looking at all the other things that happen, which may have a whole lot of negatives. So you need a balanced system of standards which look at both at the positive and the negative of what each company is doing, what each investor is doing. With the launch of the impact management platform, I think we've got more opportunity. With the forthcoming launch of the ISSB, the Sustainability Standards Board for the IFRS, the global accounting body, we have some opportunities there. There's a number of ways in which we can push forward, I think, for harmonization of standards. And then you can get reporting transparency in a way in which you can look at one company and another company and take a proper view. I would come back to the urgency that Bertrand was talking about. That there are many challenges in the road towards net zero and in the road towards the SDGs. But unless you've got a financial system that positively eases your way towards those goals, frankly, we haven't got a chance. And I come back to our previous speaker. There is only one planet. There's no planet B here, and we need to mobilize that $90 trillion. And we're not going to do it if the financial system puts blockages all along the way and has a steep uphill climb, like it was to get from the subway to this building. We're not going to achieve it. We're just not going to achieve it. We have to have a different system change. I was thinking of, what's the analogy? I flew here. That's a bit of a bad. And I was just reminded that, that emergency thing that you have in a plane, if you land badly, you leave your luggage behind. You get out of the plane. We need to leave a lot of financial system luggage out of the way in order to create a new standard. This is being very ambitious, but there are an awful lot of people now, very influential people, who are saying the same thing. I think this is a cusp point where there will be change.
I'd like to share with the audience that indeed it's urgent, but there are groups like one of the largest investors in the world in the public markets, which is BlackRock, who has already included not only data, Bertrand makes a face like this, not only data in their way of making investment decisions, but also in processes and making sure they measure what they're really doing. And it's not just greenwashing. They have implemented this criteria. I mean, that's what they say. Not in the index, but in the active management. This
is a tiny, tiny part of what they're doing.
That's a good point, but because they have indices and they cannot influence those. But in the active management, they are 100% already there. And this is a very good news. I mean, we have to celebrate that. Also, but of course, there is a long way. And, and therefore, Bertrand, maybe the developed world, we hear that, for example, in the wealth management, that 47% of the asset owners in Europe are planning to really invest only with ESG or impact criteria at some point. In the US, it's a bit less percentage growth because they have other values. Probably in Asia, it's even less. So regionally, it's different. But Bertrand, you mentioned something about emerging markets. Yeah. So you say they're either in there, or what is your view? Are they important in all of this?
No, just first of all, to react to your point on things happening, I mentioned to you before we moved on the stage, there was a very interesting report published by one of your peers, EDEC Business School in France. They screened all the passive investment vehicles called ESG, green, impact, etc. And they found, astonishingly, that only 12% of these passive investment vehicles could really qualify or give a real green or ESG touch. I'm not talking about 60%, 40%, 12%. So this is a reality. This is a harsh reality. It's like putting a drop of mint juice in a cup of water and say, this is green. No, but that's serious. So the second point.
Passive, for those who are not in the financial world, you know, passive investing is just index, which means you have no influence and there is somebody replicating what the market is doing, not choosing actively businesses.
But it's important because passive is gaining traction. This is really the heart of the asset management. So coming back to your point on emerging market, and that's something we've discussed with Impact Task Force with Cliff. For me, it's a crucial issue. Let's face it, we will not get to climate without the emerging market. We will not get to nature and biodiversity without the emerging market, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, it will be okay in France, in Spain, etc. I think it's never fast enough, it's never deep enough, but it's moving. The reality is that what is happening there? Do we mobilize enough resources to get there, etc.? And it's very difficult because, of course, we are not from the same starting point. And we are at the moment, it's been very visible at the COP on how much money you need to transfer from the north to the south. And I've been part of the previous conversation on the 100 billions, which actually mean nothing. We need way more than that, but it has become a symbol of the tension between the advanced economy and the rest of the world. But it's true. I mean, one of the African presidents told me once, okay, guys, you've used 90% of the nature budget over the last 200 years. Now there is 10% left, and we want us to all fasten our seatbelt. And this is a real question. And now, because we are smart, etc., we, the hipsters or the bobos of the world, we have decided that this is the way to go. And we turn to the rest of them and say, now you have to, we put the bar here, and you have to jump like this. And if you don't get any money, because these are our new standards. So this is a real issue. I really support what Cliff said. If we really mean inclusive, we have to be inclusive. It's not just impact, it's not just for the companies which are followed by BlackRock. We are not talking about the Fortune 500. We are talking about a number of smaller companies everywhere, and we are talking about everybody in the world. And if we are not inclusive, we will totally miss the SDG and et cetera, et cetera. This will not happen. So this is absolutely essential to never, ever forget that it has to be together. And the big difficulty we are facing today, as opposed to the previous shift of system, in particular in the early 1970s, when basically we all moved to Friedman, the social purpose of business is to increase profits. That's still very much the way we are hardwired today. The US was a master of the world. And so nobody could question it. Even Mitterrand in France tried for 2 years, and then he said, okay, fair enough, I'm joining the crowd, the Washington Consensus, whatever you call it. Now, there is no master of the world. There is a competition on this. We should not fool ourselves either. Europe is pushing its own agenda with the taxonomy, with the various directives. The US are moving with BlackRock, Bloomberg, S&P, etc. And China, I don't know whether they're moving. So who will make it happen? How can we really engage the emerging markets so that we have a global approach to that? And that's really, for me, the crucial moment. How can we join forces instead of competing on who is going to design the standards and provide the tools to get there? And that's an important moment, because it's not just a technical conversation. A number of people, I remember I spoke to Mr. Fine, and said, Bertrand, how do you want me to go on TV and explain that accounting standards are important? They say, but they are important, so you might have to find a way to get there. It's about our values. How do we want to live in 20 or 30 years from now? How do we want to finance our economy? And it's not just, again, an accounting technical conversation. What do we want?
It is.
And I want this to be
maybe
chosen by my
can
parliament here, not by, you know, some American institution or Chinese institution.
Yeah, I think that Bertrand, you're making a very good point, but I do think we need to Cliff's, what Cliff was saying, we need a simple and a accessible financial accounting system. And look at how many decades it took to develop IFRS, and we still have US GAAP, et cetera, et cetera. So we do need the International Sustainability Standards Board and the big accounting firms and also the business schools and us as an investor community or participants in the impact ecosystem to push hard for clarity and for speed, because without it we just losing time, right? And we don't have that time. So we need to accelerate that adoption, and then we're also going to get away from maybe even these conferences, because we're going to get away from this discussion about what is ESG, what is impact, because if it's fully integrated into accounting, we're not having this debate anymore, what is the cost of a PET bottle in the ocean, right? We're just, it's priced in. If you didn't really collect your own trash, you have an issue and you need to account for it in your P&L. And that's this thinking that also then needs to be reflected into the investor world. And I think the regulators are trying that, because the longer we wait, the more the PRI has this inevitable policy response thinking, right? The longer we wait, the bigger the impact of regulations will be, or they'll try. And to Bertrand's point, the taxonomy alignment at the moment, for instance, we run sustainable equity funds. Yeah, A, it's not complete, so 2 out of 6 climate criteria is not really helpful. But B, the alignment is super low. It's only 2 or 3% in a sustainable equity portfolio, which has about a 30% lower carbon footprint compared to MSCI. So what are we achieving with very complex regulation that is half? I, by the way, support the EU's efforts and ambition level, but you need to facilitate an easy adoption and really accelerate this, because without it you're going to have these debates for the next 10, 20 years.
And perhaps we should talk a little bit about the impact accounting concept, just so that people know what we're talking about here. So if we manage to get those harmonized standards, then you can start requiring impact statements from each company. Okay, impact statements, that's one step. Next step is to say impact accounts. So you're starting to put that into your annual accounts. Next step, do you take the good and the bad of your impact statements and monetize those, turn it into a value statement? You know, how much is it worth that you've done good? How much is worth that you've done that's negative? And that gets you to impact-weighted accounts or impact accounting. There are various organizations working towards this. In fact, I was talking to Mark Goff from the Capitals Coalition that's convening that group at the moment, 12 different organizations coming at different angles towards impact accounting. Current thinking is we're probably 3 to 5 years off from that system. But if you...
So Cliff, do you think we don't have to do impact? Do you think we have to include in our, you know, we are audited companies in financials. Will we have to be audited in impact or ESG?
You then have to have audit and assurance, absolutely. And
is this coming from the regulator, or is it just coming from, at some point?
Well, do you know, it's actually coming through technology, because this is only looking at listed assets. You can scrape the information, and you can use various technologies to put, you know, a dollar amount on different areas that you're already providing information on, and that's what the Harvard group of impact-weighted accounts is doing. It's a technological approach. We'll also need to socialize that with companies, with jurisdictions, with regulators, and that's more what the Value Balancing Alliance is doing. But you know, you can do quite a lot now without anybody's permission, because you've already put the data in your annual accounts, in your listing.
So we might see in the future valuation of companies when we buy or sell businesses, any entrepreneurs here or families that own businesses, we might have to value them in the future, including these criteria, because there is no doubt that those who make the homework will have more value. Kempe said something when we were discussing to prepare this panel that everything will be impact or it will not be, which is very provocative. Kempe, why did you say that?
Why I said that? Well, you see these I mean, I'm not sure if it's system changes, but you see these big trends, macro trends globally, right? These businesses like EcoAlf have a reason for existence. We just used up, Bertrand was saying the same thing, we just used up too many resources, and so consumer preferences are changing. And with that, I think you see also fundamental industries rethinking their business models. Because if there's, I mean, we can go back to the Club of Rome and limits to growth. But if you talk about businesses understanding their limit to growth, they need to change the way they use up resources, or they need to change the way they sell their products. Because at the end of the day, if it's not sellable anymore, they're going to put themselves out of business. And this is having implications in different industries in different ways. Look at automotive. I mean, everybody's very excited about electric cars, but the volume-based thinking in automotive hasn't changed, right? We're just trying, the car makers are just trying to sell more electric cars now. Doesn't help necessarily the basic problem of using up resources, but it does mean that a lot of the suppliers to the automotive world and the internal combustion engines need to rethink their position in the supply chain of automobile industries. Going a bit fast here, but I'm saying that if you take impact as a concept or as a very broad thing, and I don't think I'm addressing the social question here, but if you think about that has implications and that it will be basically everywhere, that whole more sensitivity towards sustainable thinking, that will mean that also generally, and maybe I'm coming back to my opening comment, that also means for institutional investors to think hard about, for instance, what is the impact of my mainstream equity portfolio on the SDGs? And that's also to Cliff's point about data and technology. The ESG data providers have already come up with solutions or some starting points of solutions to start to think, okay, do I with this stock have a positive or negative impact on different SDGs? And so that's why I'm saying it needs to be also, if you're serious about sustainability as an investor, as a business, you need to think holistically, and you need to integrate it from a big picture perspective.
Yeah, and move quickly, jump on this now as companies and investment managers. You know, it's much better to help design this new world than to be done to. Yeah. By other organizations.
But I think the audience, we are many I think regulation is pushing for this and governments, but families with the values are also already doing this in their own small or big businesses. It's not only the financial world, definitely. And the takeaways that we're going to have from today is that maybe, yes, the world will all be impacted at some point, or it will not be. So this is each of us to think, how do we implement it in our daily lives to be coherent with these values? We have to think about emerging markets, not only the developed world, which is kind of in privileged position to maybe tackle this, but it's the whole world which is important. When you have to invest, think more about active and passive. This would be my advice. And let's don't. And I would like to, Bertrand, to finalize this panel, because you say, will the finance world save the world? Honestly, it's not the country. It's not the families and the values and our hearts who are going into this. And this is why this interesting crowd is in impact. Don't you think it's rather the contrary, more than the finance world pushing? Finance world will be pushed into it, don't you?
You need a combination of many different things. Finance, at the end of the day, is a tool. We tend to forget that. And common wisdom says the hand has to control the tool, not the other way around. Mm-hmm. It's very important. Finance at the service of the economy, and the economy at the service of people.
Voilà.
Whereas we do the other way around. Mm-hmm. Usually people are at the service of the economy, which is at the service of finance. Mm-hmm. And so we really have to change that perspective. And well, since we're in Spain, I like to quote an amazing Spanish economist, Teresa of Avila, who used to say money is a dung of evil, but an amazing manure. And that's precisely the point. Money is a great tool. Finance is a tool that allows us to think beyond borders and beyond time. So we have to reappropriate finance and put it at the service of everything we've just discussed. And so, of course, at the end of the day, it's a family, it's each of us. It's each of us as consumers, it's each of us as investors, it's each of us as workers, as entrepreneurs, as civil servants, etc. But it's very difficult because we all very know that we are all schizophrenic. I mean, I like to quote Tolstoy. I mean, in War and Peace, I think it's Prince Andrei who said, everybody wants to change the world, nobody wants to change himself. So we would like somebody to make the decision for us. It would be so great if somebody say, okay, now we have all to be impact and forget about the discussion. It will not happen. And again, my kids are making fun of me every time I'm taking a plane. They make fun of me whenever I confuse the litter box, etc. And they are right. But they also are schizophrenic because they also do them. I mean, so we really, what we realize is that it's not just a business as usual with a little tweak. No. And that is very exciting, but also scary. And that's precisely the moment we are today. We really are, we are at the crossroads. We know this is the right direction. We are still hesitant. You have some pioneers, I mean, some in this room or on stage. But this is not enough. We can't hide too long behind pioneers. We can't hide in the fog. So we have to take, I mean, in the fog, you have to take a compass and navigate. And it's difficult. And in the fog, you also have people which are gaming the system, the people which are professional greenwashers, professional SDG washers. That's precisely what is confusing.
Absolutely. So we from this forum interpelamos a la audiencia and to everybody who is listening to reconsider how we are, each of us, living, how our businesses are being driven, where do we invest, and we hope to get the tools to end up all having maybe a view of transparency, which is really important. Mm-hmm. I thank you very, very much, and I encourage each of you who would like to maybe develop further any discussion with these three speakers, and it was really extraordinary. Thank you, an extraordinary organization from Ship2B, from what you're doing. Thank you very much.